2001 A Space Odyssey wasn't just a science fiction film. It was a 4-year obsession that nearly destroyed careers, bodies, and sanity itself. Stanley Kubrick didn't make movies, he waged war against physics, convention, and sometimes his own collaborators. While audiences saw pristine spacecraft dancing to Strauss waltzes, behind the cameras lurked heroin, addicted ape, men, exploding lights, raining, glass shards, and a director so paranoid about aliens he tried to buy insurance against them. This is the story of a masterpiece forged in chaos. Here are 20 weird facts about 2001 A Space Odyssey that reveal what really happened when perfectionism met madness. And stick around for the bonus fact, because what Kubrick did to one Academy Award, winning composer, is still talked about in Hollywood as one of the cruelest moments in film history. Let's descend into the abyss. Number 20. The lead ape man was a legal heroin addict throughout production. What audiences didn't know was that Moonwatcher, the ape who discovers humanity's first weapon, performed every scene while legally addicted to pharmaceutical-grade heroin. American mime Dan Richter injected a doctor-prescribed speedball, a combination of heroin and cocaine, up to 7 times each day during filming. Richter had achieved legal addict status in England, where the film shot, receiving medical-grade substances from what he described as an aristocratic lady doctor in tweed suits. When the speedball didn't provide enough stimulation, he kept state-supplied methamphetamine on hand. Kubrick discovered this arrangement midway through production and nearly fired him. But once he learned Richter was legal, he gave himself enough moral wiggle room to let it slide. Kubrick even asked Richter to describe what being high felt like. The irony cuts deep. The actor who portrayed humanity's evolutionary leap into consciousness was chemically altered throughout the entire sequence, his movements choreographed through a pharmaceutical haze while studying primates at the London Zoo for months. Number 19. A leopard nearly killed the cast while Kubrick directed from inside a protective cage. September 1967 brought the most terrifying day of production. For the leopard attack scene in the Dawn of Man sequence, a real leopard was brought onto the soundstage at Borehamwood Studios. The leopard knew its trainer, Terry Duggan, but not Dan Richter. When the big cat jumped onto Duggan in his ape suit, it immediately spotted Richter and lunged. Duggan tackled the leopard just in time. Throughout the entire day of filming, the crew worked unprotected, exposed to a predator that could kill any of them. Stanley Kubrick, he directed from inside a specially constructed one, man-protective cage. Years later, Richter recalled the crew's resentment with brutal clarity. Everybody was very nervous because they figured Stanley's in a fucking cage. He doesn't have a problem. This wasn't caution. It wasn't about protecting the director. This was Kubrick ensuring his vision survived at any cost while his crew risked dismemberment. The scene appears for seconds on screen, but everyone who filmed it remembers the animal's eyes, the hot lights, the director safe behind bars. Number 18. The massive centrifuge set exploded lights that showered crew with glass, nearly killing an artificial intelligence pioneer. The Discovery's rotating centrifuge wasn't just ambitious, it was actively dangerous. The 38 feet in diameter, 10 feet wide, 30-ton Ferris wheel required constant rotation, and film lights don't like going upside down. They exploded. Frequently, hot glass rained down on the crew, who wore hard hats at all times during centrifuge shooting. But the worst moment came when Massachusetts Institute of Technology artificial intelligence pioneer Marvin Minsky visited the set. Kubrick, eager to show off, ordered the centrifuge rotated for the distinguished guest. A pipe wrench fell from above, narrowly missing Minsky's head by inches. Had it connected, it would have killed one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence, a man whose work influenced the very concept of HAL 9000. The crew scrambled. Kubrick continued filming. The irony was not lost on anyone. A machine designed to represent humanity's technological achievement nearly destroyed the brain that conceptualized artificial consciousness. Number 17. At the premiere, 241 people walked out, including Rock Hudson, who asked what the hell it was about. The April 1968 premiere screening wasn't a triumph, it was a mass exodus. A documented 241 attendees walked out of the theater before the film's conclusion, bewildered and frustrated by what they'd witnessed. Among them, Rock Hudson, who marched down the aisle declaring loudly, "Will someone tell me what the hell this is about?" Some reports quote him as saying, "What is this bullshit?" Roger Ebert attended that screening and watched the walkouts with fascination, knowing that those with patience had just witnessed something profound. Arthur C. Clarke later stated this was intentional. If audiences completely understood 2001 A Space Odyssey, he and Kubrick would have failed. But Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer executives nearly pulled the film from theaters to cut their losses. Theater owners noticed something odd, though. Young adults were buying out front rows, getting high, and immersing themselves in the psychedelic final 20 minutes. Theater managers begged Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer to reconsider. That pause saved the film. What Hudson dismissed as incomprehensible became the ultimate trip for a generation. Number 16. Kubrick hired and recorded Alex North's entire musical score, then fired it at the premiere. Alex North composed 40 minutes of original music in just 2 weeks for 2001: A Space Odyssey. The legendary composer, who'd scored Spartacus and A Streetcar Named Desire, pushed himself so hard his back spasms he had to be transported to the recording session in an ambulance and couldn't even conduct his own orchestra. Henry Brent conducted while North writhed in pain. Kubrick attended the sessions, listened, gave notes, seemed satisfied. North believed he'd created something special. Then came the premiere. North sat in the audience and heard Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra thunder through the speakers. Not one note of his music appeared in the film. He'd had no warning, no phone call, no explanation. Kubrick had decided months earlier to keep his temporary classical music tracks but never told North, who only discovered his score's abandonment while watching his work's absence projected before thousands. He was devastated. The unused score was eventually recorded posthumously by Jerry Goldsmith and released, allowing the world to hear what might have been a gentler, more emotional 2001: A Space Odyssey that Kubrick had already killed in secret. Number 15. Kubrick ordered all props, sets, and blueprints destroyed to prevent exploitation. After wrapping production, Kubrick issued an order that sounds almost vindictive: destroy everything. Props, miniatures, sets, blueprints, unused footage, all of it erased. His reasoning? He'd seen what happened to Forbidden Planet's Robbie the Robot, which appeared in everything from Lost in Space to The Twilight Zone to The Addams Family, becoming a kitsch pop culture joke. Kubrick refused to let his meticulously designed future be scavenged by lesser productions or sold as cheap memorabilia. So the massive centrifuge was dismantled and destroyed. The intricate spacecraft models were obliterated. The blueprints were burned. Only a few items survived by accident or subterfuge. A 2001: A Space Odyssey spacesuit backpack appeared in an episode of UFO. An EVA pod somehow ended up in Watto's junkyard in The Phantom Menace. In 2015, the Ares 1B Trans lunar space shuttle model sold for $344,000, its rarity entirely manufactured by Kubrick's systematic destruction of his own legacy. What he couldn't control, he eliminated. This wasn't preservation, this was scorched earth. Number 14. Kubrick tried to take out insurance against extraterrestrial life being discovered before release. Just before National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Mariner 4 spacecraft flew past Mars in July 1965, Kubrick grew obsessed with a terrifying possibility. What if aliens were discovered while he was still making his alien movie? He approached Lloyd's of London requesting an insurance policy that would compensate him if extraterrestrial intelligence was found before 2001: A Space Odyssey premiered. Lloyd's response remains disputed. Some sources say they declined because the probability was too small. Others claim they quoted him an astronomically expensive premium Kubrick couldn't afford. Either way, Kubrick went uninsured, taking his chances with the universe. Arthur C. Clarke called him one of the world's champion worriers, and this anxiety consumed him. He and Clarke would frantically call each other whenever Soviet scientists claimed to detect signals from space. In one instance, they contacted the New York Times to verify Russian reports about quasar CTA-102, only to learn it was mere fluctuations. Kubrick's paranoia was so intense he envisioned his 4-year, $10.5 million project being rendered obsolete by National Aeronautics and Space Administration finding microbes on Mars. The Mariner found nothing. The policy remained unpurchased. The universe kept its secrets a bit longer. Number 13. Hal's voice actor was cast at the last minute after 2 others were fired. HAL 9000 was originally conceived as female and named Athena. When Kubrick switched to male, he hired British actor Nigel Davenport to voice the role. Davenport recorded lines on set with the actors, then Kubrick fired him 3 weeks before production wrapped, deciding his thick British accent was too distracting. Next came Martin Balsam, the Oscar-winning actor from 12 Angry Men and 1,000 Clowns. Balsam recorded the entire role, including emotional crying during Hal's death scene. Kubrick wanted it very realistically and humanly. But after recording wrapped, Kubrick decided Balsam sounded too colloquially American and too emotional. During actual filming, HAL's lines were read by assistant director Derek Cracknell, whose strong Cockney accent baffled actors trying to perform against it. Finally, Kubrick remembered Douglas Rain, a Canadian theater actor he'd heard narrating a 1960 documentary called Universe. Rain had what Kubrick called a bland mid-Atlantic accent, impossible to place geographically. Rain flew to London and recorded all of Hal's dialogue in one 10-hour session over 2 days, never seeing footage or a full script. To soften his voice, he recorded barefoot with his feet resting on a pillow. He never even watched the finished film until it premiered in theaters months later. Number 12. The production went $4.5 million over budget and 16 months behind schedule. What was initially budgeted at $6 million ballooned to $10.5 million, a catastrophic overrun for 1968. Originally planned for late 1966 release, the film finally premiered in April 1968, a full 16 months late. The delays weren't accidents. They were the inevitable consequence of Kubrick's working method. Everything had to be perfect, which meant everything had to be done 8 or 9 times. Special effects supervisor Douglas Trumbull estimated they shot 200 times more footage than ended up in the final cut. For the 200 or so effects scenes, each required approximately 10 steps, meaning 2,000 steps total. But most steps were repeated 8 or 9 times to ensure perfection, resulting in roughly 16,000 separate operations, flowcharts, diagrams, and elaborate record. Keeping systems tracked every element. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer executives sweated as costs mounted and release dates evaporated. The film's star Keir Dullea later said not one foot was made with computer-generated effects, everything was done physically or chemically, one painstaking frame at a time. Kubrick's obsession with realism meant importing 90 tons of sand, having it washed and painted gray to resemble the moon's surface. The budget didn't stand a chance. Number 11. For the moonscape, Kubrick directed second-unit photographers by telephone because he was afraid of flying. The stunning landscape shots in the Dawn of Man sequence weren't filmed on location, they were still photographs taken by a second unit in Africa. But Kubrick, who had a pilot's license but a phobia of flying in airplanes, couldn't go himself. Instead, he directed the photographers by telephone from London, using an elaborate grid system. Actor Keir Dullea described the process. Kubrick had a graph with numbers 1 through 6 going up the left side and letters A through G across the top. He'd be on direct telephone connection with the still photographers in Africa, giving instructions like, "Okay, Joe, the mountain range should start. You've got it at 3B. Change it so now it's 4M." This remote direction allowed Kubrick to control every aspect of the landscape composition without ever boarding a plane. The photographers would shoot, send the stills back to London, and Kubrick would adjust coordinates until the African terrain looked exactly like his prehistoric vision. Those static photographs were then projected onto massive screens behind the ape, men on the Boreham Wood soundstage, creating the illusion of vast, primordial landscapes that Kubrick had designed from thousands of miles away. Number 10. The iconic floating pen was created with double-sided tape stuck to glass. Kubrick and his effects team spent months trying to create a convincing effect for the floating pen in the space shuttle sequence. They experimented with elaborate techniques, complex rigs, invisible wires. Nothing worked properly. Finally, exhausted and running out of time, someone suggested the simplest possible solution. Stick the pen to glass using newly invented double-sided tape and move the glass in front of the camera. It worked perfectly. If you watch carefully, you can see the shuttle attendant give the pen a slight pull when she grabs it, detaching it from the tape. This wasn't sophisticated visual effects wizardry, it was Scotch tape and glass. But it looks utterly convincing because Kubrick understood that sometimes the simplest solution is the correct one. The shot required no optical effects, no complicated composites, just practical ingenuity. That pen floating in zero gravity became iconic, not through technical complexity, but through elegant problem solving. The lesson: you don't need to reinvent physics to fake it. You just need to be clever enough to know when simplicity beats sophistication. Number 9. The entire centrifuge was a functional rotating set that cost $750,000. The Discovery's centrifuge wasn't a visual effect or a miniature. It was a real 38 feet in diameter, 30-ton rotating Ferris wheel built by Vickers Armstrong Engineering Group at a cost of $750,000, equivalent to $6.8 million today. Actors would walk or run inside it while the entire structure rotated around them, keeping them at the bottom through synchronization of their movement with the rotation speed. The camera could be fixed inside the wheel to show actors walking completely around the set, or mounted so the wheel rotated independently while the camera remained stationary, creating the famous jogging scene where Gary Lockwood appears to run up walls and across ceilings. For shots requiring actors on opposite sides, one actor had to be strapped securely to the top of the wheel while the other walked toward him from below as it turned. This wasn't trickery, this was brute force engineering. The centrifuge represented Hollywood's largest rotating set to that point, and while Fred Astaire had danced on the ceiling in Royal Wedding, 1951, nothing approached this scale. The set was so massive and complex that rotating it caused constant equipment failures and safety hazards. Number 8. Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick developed the novel and screenplay simultaneously. The novel and film weren't separate entities, they evolved together in a unique collaboration. Kubrick and Clarke initially created a 130-page prose treatment, which became the foundation for both the screenplay and Clarke's novel. They worked simultaneously, with Clarke writing the novel while Kubrick shot the film, each influencing the other's work. But tension emerged. Kubrick had promised Clarke the novel could be published before the film's release, then reneged as production dragged on. Kubrick didn't want the story known before audiences saw his vision. This caused serious friction because Clarke needed the money, and his payment was repeatedly delayed as publication was deferred. The novel ended up being published after the film premiered, and differences emerged. The destination changed from Saturn to Jupiter because Kubrick and effects supervisor Douglas Trumbull couldn't create convincing Saturn rings. Clarke adjusted the novel accordingly in subsequent books. The collaboration produced 2 masterpieces, but Clarke later admitted the financial and creative strain nearly broke their partnership. Kubrick's control extended beyond his film into Clarke's separate artistic medium. Number 7. Scientists from National Aeronautics and Space Administration and IBM designed the sets to ensure authentic functionality. Kubrick's obsession with realism extended beyond aesthetics into actual engineering. Experts from National Aeronautics and Space Administration and IBM were brought in to design sets and equipment to ensure authenticity. Arthur C. Clarke regularly called fellow science fiction author Isaac Asimov to discuss biochemical processes for the screenplay. The equipment designed for the lunar mission would actually work on the moon's surface, not look like it might work, but genuinely function if transported there. IBM consulted on HAL's design and capabilities, though Kubrick ultimately decided not to use their logo due to the computer's eventual malevolence. Swiss manufacturer Hamilton provided actual functioning watches for the astronauts. Vogue created the clothing using real fabrics and construction techniques suitable for a space environment. This wasn't production design, this was proto-engineering for a future that hadn't happened yet. When Apollo 8 astronauts viewed the film's spacesuits and equipment, they commended their realism. Kubrick didn't just predict the future, he built it with such precision that actual space agencies recognized his speculative technology as plausible. The film became a documentary of a future that hadn't occurred. Number 6. The astronauts' breathing sounds were provided by Stanley Kubrick himself. Those haunting, claustrophobic breathing sounds during the spacewalk scenes, the mechanical rhythm of human respiration isolated in the vacuum, came from Kubrick himself. According to his daughter Katharina, Stanley recorded his own breathing for the astronauts' spacesuits. This intimate detail adds unexpected humanity to the director's perfectionist reputation. Kubrick wasn't just controlling every visual element, he was literally breathing life into his characters. The sound became one of the film's most memorable audio signatures, that steady, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that emphasizes the fragility of human life in the hostile environment of space. It's simultaneously comforting and terrifying, organic and mechanical. That it came from the director himself makes it almost confessional, as if Kubrick embedded his own life force into the film's DNA. Every breath audiences hear during those tense sequences is Kubrick, present in the suffocating silence of space, reminding viewers that a vacuum doesn't carry sound, but human fear does, one breath at a time. Number 5. A 30-ton rotating set created the zero-gravity walking effect. The famous scene where the space stewardess appears to walk up the wall and end up upside down wasn't accomplished through wires or optical tricks, it was pure mechanical rotation. A massive set was built that could rotate 180 degrees while the camera rotated with it, maintaining a consistent point of view. The actress remained at the bottom of the frame while the entire environment turned around her. From the audience's perspective, she appears to defy gravity, walking up the circular walkway and stepping into a connecting hallway while inverted. This required meticulous choreography between actress movement and set rotation speed, with the camera mounted to rotate in perfect sync. The effect is seamless because it's physically real, no compositing, no animation, just Newtonian physics and engineering precision. Sets like this required weeks of rehearsal and testing. Actors had to maintain perfect timing, or the illusion shattered. Kubrick demanded take after take until the movement felt natural despite its supernatural appearance. Number 4. The film innovated front projection technique on an unprecedented scale. For the Dawn of Man sequence, Kubrick pioneered the use of front projection on a scale never attempted before. The technique involved a separate scenery projector set at a right angle to the camera with a half-silvered mirror placed at an angle in front, reflecting the projected image onto a backdrop of retroreflective material. This retroreflective screen could reflect light 100 times more efficiently than the foreground subjects, allowing the African landscape photographs to appear behind the ape, men without showing on their costumes. The lighting had to be precisely balanced, so any image falling on the foreground was too faint to appear on film. Front projection had existed for still photography and small TV productions, but never at this scale for feature filmmaking. The only unintended consequence was the leopard's eyes, which glowed due to projector illumination. Kubrick called this a happy accident. Richard Donner later used this technique to make Christopher Reeve fly in Superman, 1978. The innovation allowed Kubrick to place his ape, men in photorealistic African landscapes without ever leaving the soundstage or risking the uncontrollable variables of location shooting. He'd invented a technique to fake reality more convincingly than reality itself. Number 3. Kubrick innovated motion control photography to create realistic spacecraft movement. The majestic, smooth spacecraft shots that redefined science fiction cinematography required inventing an entirely new filming technique. The effects team developed motion control. Model ships moved along tracks at exact speeds, specifically 4 inches per minute, allowing the crew to replicate shots with perfect precision. By programming the track's movement, they could layer multiple passes of the same shot. One pass for the spacecraft model, another for stars, another for Earth or the Moon, all perfectly synchronized. This precision meant no hand, wobble, no imperfections, no human error, just mathematically perfect movement. The technique was revolutionary and would be refined further by Industrial Light and Magic for Star Wars in 1977, becoming the foundation of all pre-digital effects filmmaking. But Kubrick and his team invented the principle. If you can control movement with mechanical precision, you can composite reality. Those serene shots of Discovery gliding through space weren't serene because they were slow, they were serene because they were perfect. The spacecraft moved with balletic grace because mathematics, not human hands, choreographed their dance. Number 2. The film used 10,000 Polaroid photographs to calculate lighting and exposure. Cinematographer Geoffrey Unsworth employed an unusual approach to achieve proper light balance and exposure. Before filming any scene, he would use a Polaroid camera loaded with ASA 200 black and white film to photograph each new setup. He found this instant check method far more rapid and effective than light meters or calculations. Throughout production, 10,000 Polaroid shots were taken, a massive number that reveals the obsessive testing required for every angle, every setup, every lighting configuration. Unsworth worked constantly at the toe end of the film's latitude scale, shooting in scatterlight and directly into practical fixtures, technically difficult conditions that required absolute precision. Those Polaroids became a massive reference library, allowing him to replicate successful setups and avoid repeating failures. In an era before digital monitoring or instant playback, Polaroid photography gave Unsworth and Kubrick immediate visual confirmation. This wasn't just helpful, it was essential for a production shooting effects that couldn't be verified until film was developed days later. Every frame required certainty, and certainty required instant chemical photography, one Polaroid at a time. Number 1. Clarke feared Kubrick would reject him for being gay, but Kubrick didn't care. Midway through their collaboration, Arthur C. Clarke grew anxious about a secret he'd been keeping. He was gay. In the 1960s, this revelation could end careers and collaborations. Worried Kubrick might reject further work with him, Clarke finally gathered the courage to confront the issue directly. During one of their meetings, he abruptly announced, "Stan, I want you to know that I'm a very well-adjusted homosexual." Kubrick responded without missing a beat. "Yeah, I know," and immediately continued discussing the topic at hand. A relieved smile spread across Clarke's face. He'd been terrified for nothing. Later, describing the scene to his wife Christiane, Kubrick said Clarke had sounded like a schoolteacher. "He was very pleased that I don't care, and he doesn't know how much I don't care." In an era when homosexuality could destroy professional relationships, Kubrick's complete indifference was radical. He cared about the work. That's all. Clarke's sexual orientation was utterly irrelevant to Kubrick's artistic vision. This brief exchange reveals something essential about Kubrick. His obsessiveness focused entirely on craft, not convention. In a conservative industry during a conservative era, Kubrick's lack of concern wasn't just decent, it was revolutionary. Bonus fact: Douglas Rain never met Keir Dullea and never saw the film until the premiere. The most famous conversation in science fiction cinema, Dave Bowman and HAL 9000, was performed by two actors who never met, never spoke, and worked months apart. Douglas Rain recorded all of Hal's dialogue in a 10-hour session in London, with Kubrick sitting 4 feet away, feeding him cues. Rain never saw footage. He never read the full script. He had no idea where his lines fit in the narrative. For the famous Daisy Bell death scene, Rain sang the song over 50 times in different tempos and pitches. Kubrick used the first take. Meanwhile, Keir Dullea filmed his scenes months earlier with assistant director Derek Cracknell reading Hal's lines in a thick Cockney accent. Dullea didn't hear Douglas Rain's actual voice until watching the premiere. Rain himself never watched the film until that premiere screening months after his recording session. Years later, Dullea would say, "He's the main character of the film as far as I'm concerned. It was brilliant casting." But he'd never met the man whose voice haunts cinema history. Rain called Hal's dispassionate delivery a load of rubbish during recording. He had no idea he'd created one of film's most iconic performances, a role so perfect that Anthony Hopkins later cited it as inspiration for Hannibal Lecter, calling Hal's voice Katharine Hepburn, Truman Capote, and Hal, from 2001, A Space Odyssey, combined. The collaboration that never was produced, the century's most chilling artificial intelligence. 2001 A Space Odyssey premiered in confusion, hemorrhaged walkouts, and nearly bankrupted Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Critics called it boring, pretentious, incomprehensible. Rock Hudson demanded someone explain it to him as he fled the theater. Then young audiences discovered the Stargate sequence could be watched while high, and theater managers noticed front rows selling out repeatedly. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer decided to keep showing it. The film that almost died became a cultural phenomenon, not despite its difficulty, but because of it. Kubrick had gambled everything on a film without heroes, without villains, with barely any dialogue, with an ending that refused to explain itself. He'd destroyed friendships, firing composers without warning, working collaborators to physical collapse, directing from cages while leopards stalked his crew. He'd built a rotating 30-ton centrifuge, imported 90 tons of sand, taken out insurance against aliens, hired a heroine, addicted mime to play humanity's evolutionary ancestor. And somehow, through that chaos, he'd created the most influential science fiction film ever made. A film that made other filmmakers realize they could aim higher, stranger, more ambitious. A film that proved audiences would watch something challenging if it was also transcendent. 6 years later, every science fiction film still lives in 2001 A Space Odyssey's shadow. The monolith stands eternal,